All right. I think we are live. Yes, just now. Emily, let's wait for a couple of minutes for
Sure.
people to show up.
Hmm.
If that's, yeah, great. Hi, Panayotis. Thank you for joining the call. Please leave your comment, a comment with your name, where you are from. Panayotis says that if you are on time, then you are late. So you should be like a couple of minutes earlier. I agree. I agree, Panayoti. But it also depends on the culture, right? In the Greek culture, it's kind of typical for people to be a bit late. How are things in Sweden, Emily, about being on time? Are people strict?
Um, no, not super strict. I think most people are fairly on time for social events and for meetings, but if they're a few minutes late, that's also kind of normal.
Okay. 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 Panayotis also is saying, "Hi, Emily. Thanks for being with us."
Hi, no problems.
So you said you mentioned you're in Sweden, but I hear an Australian accent. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, that's
Okay.
correct. So I've been here for 6 years now.
All right. Did you move there from Australia or?
Yeah, I moved there. I moved here from Australia after doing a bit of about a year traveling around Europe. I still
Mhm.
actually haven't made it to Greece, though, unfortunately. So that's definitely on my list. I went to many places, but not to Greece.
Such a pity. Such a pity.
I know.
We are waiting for you anytime. You want to come. You have an office to work from, co-work, visit our office
Oh,
anytime,
that
Emily.
sounds very fun. I'll definitely
Yeah.
take you up on that offer. We'll see.
And Panagiotis mentions that we Greeks are experts on being late, but I can surely say I have greatly improved thanks to the SHA motto, which
Okay,
is
what's
like
that?
one of our mottos is like you're on time, then you are late. Awesome. There are a few people joining. More will join,
Mhm.
and we tend to have more of our students and viewers watch it later on YouTube and other platforms. So,
Sure.
Emily, welcome. So, thank you very much for joining this event today. I'm excited. I had a look at your LinkedIn profile. I really like what you've done there. But I would like to give the floor to you and tell us a bit about yourself and what brought you here today.
Sure. Well, what brought me here was an invitation, but I am where I am, I suppose, in terms of being focused on the future of work, because I have a fairly unusual working history that combines some really unrelated fields, actually, such as workplace safety. And also marketing and communications, which are two, like one is very creative and one is very regulated. So they're kind of two fields that don't go together. But when I was working as a safety consultant, I worked a lot with workplace culture as well, conducting interviews and that sort of thing. And firstly, it gave me an insight into far, far more people's standard work days than I ever would have been exposed to otherwise. So rather than just sitting in my little office and not meeting people from different kinds of lives, then, we worked with all kinds of companies, including manufacturing, railway operators, pharmaceuticals, just every industry that you could imagine. So it really gave me a good eye opening into how different people's day to day working is and how central communications is in every single field. So often, when there were conflicts, whether that be between people or between the leadership and the organization, many times it wasn't really that people were doing the wrong thing. I mean, that does happen, of course, too. But in many cases, it was simply a communications difference or a lack of communication filtering through the organization. So I guess that got me very interested in what work means, how people feel about it, and how we can communicate so that everybody actually can do their best and be their best, regardless of the different goals that they might have. Then that was sort of the first building block. It doesn't sound like it has much to do with future of work yet, but it will. Then I personally had the experience of traveling around the world, trying to freelance and getting an understanding of the challenges that quality of work is one thing, culture is another thing, global economics is another thing. And so I started to really become interested in how this global world starts to fit together. What does remote working mean for the future? The pandemic happened, and so then remote working was like the hot topic for everybody. And from that, obviously emerged not only changes in practices and in the way we communicate and in the way we build relationships. So this is coming back to that interest in communications, because the way that you build relationships with people when you maybe never see them or only see them once or twice a year is very different. The tools that enable that. And then the interest started to shift as well into how technology is affecting what the future of work is going to look like. So not just how we're changing in our communication styles, in our culture and in our values, but also how tools are enabling that. And that led me through to my current position where I'm researching the impact of AI on the future of work, because obviously that is one of the biggest technological shifts that we've seen. So it was a lot of little building blocks, I suppose, that seemed unrelated at the time, and only later I could kind of put them together and go, oh, that's really interesting. And that's something that I would like to see, like the big picture of how all those little things come together.
That's so great. So many things. I wrote down like I think 6 questions just
Okay,
from the
fire
get-go.
away.
But I would like to go back at the beginning. What it seems to me that you are an HR enthusiast, as am I. What brought you to the industry? What did you study that? Was it a mistake, or how was like your first job in this function?
No, so actually, I've never worked in an HR department as such. So my experience with workplace culture actually came from the safety side. Because I think actually this analysis of workplace culture and why people do things was in the safety department before it moved into HR. So originally this comes from the concept of behavioral based safety and how to influence people's actions so that they do the right thing and don't get injured. But then over time, it evolved more into the HR field, and also became, because from physical safety, it developed into psychological safety and positive workplace culture. And then it moved into the HR department and away from the safety department, although that's still part of it. Sorry, I forgot. I've lost my own train of thought mid-sentence there. Yes, so I worked with it from the safety perspective, culture, and only, I think, because I had the background in marketing and communications, did my focus become more on the interpersonal communications when there were cultural issues, which drifted a little bit away from the safety background that I had. But I've never formally worked in an HR department. So it's really been more around leadership and communications and that side of things, rather than, for example, recruiting or employment law or something like that.
I see. So I think that comes back all the time is communication.
Yes.
And how important this is inside the corporate environment. Would you like to maybe give us a few like examples of things that you noticed that people were not communicating effectively, and what you did to resolve those issues?
Sure. So in one case, actually, I was an investigator for a workplace complaint against a bullying, and I was hired to investigate if that actually happened or not. And something that emerged through these interviews were that these two people had very different communication style. So one person, when they were describing the events that happened, they were constantly saying like, I feel that this, or I feel that they, or so forth. And the other person was very logical, constantly saying, I think that they overreacted. I think that people behaved in this way. And unfortunately, the manager of that team hadn't had the training to understand different kinds of personalities and communication styles to be able to moderate those behaviors and those communication styles within their own team. So then that was referred to professional workplace relationship counselors. Another time was a communications breakdown, this not between individuals, but on an organizational level, where in the culture survey, it emerged that the workers, this was a blue collar industry situation, felt that there was no point being engaged with the organization and giving their feedback and wanting to make things better because they believed that the managers and the leadership team didn't listen to them anyway. So after a while, they said, well, I'm not going to bother giving my feedback if nobody's listening to me anyway. And the managers, or actually more than the managers, the upper leaders, were really upset about this because they said, we're doing so many things and we're trying to have a positive culture, and why can't they see all these things that we're doing for them? And it turned out that actually all the feedback was being taken on board, but because it was a very large organization and they had some serious safety issues, which always became prioritized, they had this list of like 15,000 items or something. So somebody's feedback might come in and go to the bottom of that list because it wasn't a high priority in their sort of assessment process. And that's the part that was never being communicated. So people thought that they weren't being listened to at all, because maybe it would take a few years for somebody to come back to an item that was suggested like number 14,574 on the list or something like that. So that was something that emerged, and then they were able to change their communication patterns to make it a little bit more transparent and help people feel heard.
Okay, that's a crazy story, having such a list. And was anyone looking at that list, or like
yeah,
it was
absolutely.
just
People were looking at that list, but they were executing items according to a certain prioritization category. So if it was high risk, whether that be physical safety, legal risk, or something like that, then it would be prioritized first. And if they were just small improvements, then they would be prioritized last. And this was a high risk industry, so there were many high risk items that came higher up on the list, and the small day-to-day improvements naturally came much lower. But the fact that that list existed, the process for how things were prioritized, the fact that feedback was received and placed on the list, that was all something that was missing in the internal communication. So everybody thought they were doing the right thing and nobody knew what the other people were doing.
I see. Okay, great. Thanks for the clarification. A lot of our students are just starting or quite early in their careers. And many people, communication, I feel like it should definitely be in the school, college, university curriculums. We should be learning it like all the time. It's a very, very valuable soft skill to have, of course, especially in the ever-evolving world of tech and how fast that's going. What do you suggest for someone to go and learn, become a better communicator? That might be a book or a course or a process that maybe would help that person become a better communicator. What would that look like for you?
Yeah, so I think, and you're right, communications is, and it's one of the core skills that's important, or, flagged in all these different reports and research surveys and such as being one of the core critical skills for the future, because, as those kinds of routine tasks become more automated, the things that do have value are the communications, the empathy, creative thinking, and those sorts of skills, which are inherently human and can't be replaced so easily by a machine. I think one of the core skills that people can do, or one of the core things people can do to improve their communication skills to start with, is to basically go out and take all of those different kinds of personality tests that are available for free. You say to use them with a grain of salt, like don't take it as a Bible, that it's, for example, the DISC where it says, your red, green, blue, yellow personality. I mean, you can't classify people that easily. But I think there are a lot of those different tests available, the DISC, the Myers-Briggs, all those kinds. And by reading your own profile and then seeing what differs in the other profile, it just starts to give you a good understanding of where other people might be coming from, where their values might be, even though it's not so clear cut to say a person is this red category, but still understanding those and also contrasting the different systems that exist, because I think they do overlap and they do complement each other in different ways, can help you to start understanding why the way that you communicate something may not be received the same way by somebody else. Books. I'm not sure if I have any concrete book examples. Maybe Edward de Bono's 6 Thinking Hats. It's actually about creative thinking. It's not directly about communications, but it does go quite into depth about how to go through a creative thinking process in a way which is non-confrontational and allows everybody to voice their opinions without feeling like they're being put down or attacked. So it's not actually a communications book, but I think it's a really useful one for understanding how to handle different kinds of workplace scenarios, especially when you know, it's good to take that kind of not directly confrontational, but measured approach to hearing everybody's opinions, especially in a field like IT, where you're likely to be working remotely and quite likely with people from different countries who have different backgrounds, and you can't assume that their communication style is the same as yours.
Great. Panayotis, one of our viewers today, is asking, so on the communication question, I guess, so is it more matter of self-awareness? Like
I
being
think
a good communicator?
Self-awareness is the starting point, and then you have to know where you stand in order to be able to recognize that other people are different and then imagine yourself. So self-awareness is the starting point, and then probably empathy or putting yourself in other people's shoes is the second point, and thinking about different kinds of people. Okay, if I was that person, how would I receive what I'm saying? Or if somebody communicates like that, how do I interpret it? Do I react badly, and is that valid or not? Or do I read more into what they're promising than what they're actually saying? So personal and also cultural awareness of the culture that you're in, if you're going to be working in an international environment. But it's not that self-awareness is the only thing, but you can't be aware of somebody else's point of view if you don't know where you stand yourself first.
I see. Cool. You mentioned remote work, which is actually, I feel that it was a bit of a hotter topic during COVID and post-COVID. But I would love to hear your thoughts on remote work. Do you think it's here to stay? Do you think it's a fad of COVID? How do you see remote work evolving?
I don't think it's a fad. I don't think that COVID did it any favors, sorry. Because a lot of people went into remote work during COVID reactively rather than proactively. So they just did it with no strategy, and they basically just took whatever they were doing in the office and continued doing that remote. They didn't attempt to establish new remote or hybrid first cultures. They didn't take strategies about which communication channels to use, what the expectations were around asynchronous working, whether there should be core business hours and those sorts of things. And yes, some organizations adapted very quickly. Some, of course, had been remote first long before COVID, and others sort of cobbled together bits of best practice as they went along. But most people did it very reactively, which means that they took existing behaviors that had worked in the office and then were surprised when they didn't necessarily work in the same way, remote first. I've heard the feedback that many organizations, larger ones that went remote, with existing projects and existing teams and people who had worked together in person and understood each other. And those projects worked very well during the first part of COVID remotely because there was already a foundation established. But then when they started forming new teams, new constellations, hiring new employees and starting new projects, and they had to start all of those from remote, then all of a sudden they said, hey, this remote thing doesn't work. But that's not true. It's just that they didn't adapt their behaviors. They didn't have new strategies for how to onboard team members remotely and how to build workplace culture and how to allow enough time in their planning and their schedules for people to actually build relationships remotely. So I don't think that the adjustment period is over. Obviously, a lot of organizations are still deciding where they should stand, whether it's fully remote or whether it's hybrid, and what does hybrid mean for them? Do they have a half-size office and expect half their team to be in 50% of the time, or do they rely on team meetups for a week, once every few months or once a year? What does that look for them? And I also think that what hasn't happened yet is people really embracing those decisions as part of their employer brand. So there's always been a lot of trend following in employer branding, like, oh, everybody in tech needs to have a ping pong table and beers on Fridays. Yeah, sure, that works if that's your brand and those are the people that you want to hire. But it doesn't mean that everybody should try to be the same as, should try to have a social lounge that rivals Google's. That doesn't make any sense. And just as every customer-facing brand is different and has its own voice, every employer brand should be different and have its own voice. And if people say, we love remote work and we fully embrace the remote working culture, and then that's not really true, I mean, you don't have to try and squeeze yourself into that box, because not everybody wants that anyway. Some people want to go to the office 2 or 3 times a week or every day. And I think people have yet to really embrace, like, it could be a strength to say, do you have a family and you want to have flexible work, but you really just need to be in the office 2 days a week so you don't lose your mind? Like, make that part of your brand. So I think that's something that we're still to see, is people really sticking to their decision and saying, this is who we are and these are who we're attracting, and it's okay if it doesn't attract everybody.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to take the time, but I use the same analogy between offline education and online education, that we essentially took the model of offline education, which doesn't work anyway. We put it online, we copy and pasted everything. And how do you expect for online education to work? It's not the same thing.
Exactly.
So I stand by 100% of what you said. So Panayotis is asking, thank you for the questions, Panayotis. The question is for you. What do you believe is the main cause that big corporations are getting back to traditional office approach? And he's very curious
the main
about
cause.
this.
I don't think there's one main cause. For some organizations, it might be due to real estate commitments. For other organizations, it might be due to an entrenched style of management. Excuse me. For some, it might be that they haven't figured out how to make the online culture work. For others, it might be that they are deciding that hybrid or office environment is the brand stance that they're going to take. So I don't think there's one single main reason across different organizations.
I thank you for the answer. I will take Panayotis' kind of comment. He says 9 to 5 was the model for the first factory workers. Totally wrong attitude nowadays. And my question is, how do you build a workplace culture? Culture is one of the words you've mentioned from the beginning of our call today. Actually, let's start by maybe defining what a company or corporate culture is, and then go on how to build it, how to develop it.
Sure. So going back to my history in safety, we always said that culture isn't what you say, but it's like the unspoken rule of how we do things around here. And it's something that exists, whether you actively try to manage it or not. One thing that I do think is a flaw is that people in leadership positions believe that the culture is something they should build. Like, you put one person in charge of culture and they try to create it. I think it's more like a Lego set. So you provide the bricks, but it's up to the workers how they build it. So it's up to you what materials you put there for building it. It's not something that you can consciously decide to build. So you can provide those foundations of, well, we're going to be remote, we're going to be hybrid. You can provide tools. You can provide a set of policies that outline certain expectations. You can provide training to your leaders that help them understand asynchronous workflow planning. You can put all those things in place, and then you have a working system where you schedule people in back-to-back meetings, and they never have the time to have a personal conversation with their colleagues, and all those other building blocks that you put in place still won't build the positive culture that you want. So I think that, yeah, it's important for people to consider it as building blocks or puzzle pieces or something like that, that you give to your team and allow them to assemble it, rather than something that you can control so directly, because also every person will bring their own contribution to those bricks. And then again, you decide, is that going to be reflected in our HR practices by hiring very many people from different backgrounds? Then they're going to bring a whole lot of different building blocks into that situation. But I do think that not allowing the time and space for people to build relationships online is one of the big failures that I've seen, at least.
Okay.
Because you don't just sit next to somebody and then start talking about your weekend like you might in an office. So, you know, if people are back to back with meetings or have so many deadlines, even if you provide a chat forum, they're not going to have the time to do any more other than answer direct questions. So do people actually have the time and space to adjust to new ways of working and new ways of communicating? Yeah, was that a sufficient answer?
Yeah. It was great. I love the way you process information and my questions. I really loved this quote from you, that culture is like a Lego. You give the building blocks and allow people to assemble them.
Mm-hmm.
But let me dive a bit deeper in this. What are those building blocks? Is it values that, let's say it's a startup of 20 people, or let's say 50 people startup, right? Tech startup. Is it, does these building blocks come from the founders in regards to mission, vision, values? Is it process oriented, these building blocks? Is it what maybe you mentioned, kind of build a safe space for people to communicate and have conversations out of the work context, out of meetings context?
I think it's all of those things.
Okay.
So, I mean, of course, it starts from the mission and vision, also that you follow through and that you walk the talk. The leadership style and whether they lead by example, you know, do they lead by example? Are they more giving directions? The tools that you have available, digital tools, communications tools, the operational tools as well. Again, whether you are hybrid, office-based, remote, processes that you have, policies that you have as well. Like, do you have a policy in Australia? It's just becoming legal, or I'm not sure if it just did become legal, that actually you have a legal right to disconnect. So you may work remotely, you may work from home, but you actually have the legal right to turn off everything at 9 or 10 o'clock or whatever time your working style is. And if you don't reply all weekend, you can't be penalized for that, because, and this has come obviously as a response to the pervasiveness of digital work, that it's in your pocket, it's in your house, it's on your kitchen table, you never leave work, you're always thinking about it and you're always available. So people do need to have this ability to disconnect. So being empowered to do that, and also having the personal self-management to actually do that and not be tempted, oh, I'll just check one more email even though it's the middle of the night. What have I said already? Yeah, HR policies, even salaries, other benefits, the way that you do schedule interpersonal meetups if you are a remote first organization, all of those are part of the building blocks, as well as how you manage your time and workflows during the day.
Excellent. Miltiadis asks, I think, an interesting question. So he says, so what strategies can an employer use to mitigate the lack of physical proximity in the remote work environment?
It depends what their goal is. If the goal is that people should be building close relationships with their colleagues, then they need to provide tools and time to allow for that to happen. And that comes down to what kind of workloads people have. Do they have enough staff that people aren't always feeling under pressure, that they have something to do when they don't have time to talk? Probably a community manager, because community managers get conversations going and keep conversations flowing in digital forums. Maybe a remote office, which, there are a lot of different ones where you can see, like, are they sitting in a meeting room? Are they sitting in the room where they're open to chat? Because, of course, it's also a risk that you keep getting interrupted by people calling you or saying, hey, are you available? But that may not be every employer's goal. Again, I think this comes back to what I was saying before about, like, what we have really yet to see is people making a decision and sticking to it as part of their brand. Like, everybody is trying to adopt the same set of best practice behaviors. Maybe some organizations don't actually care if you have a close personal relationship with your colleagues, but what they do care about is retaining you through having work that highly aligns with your personal values. And if that's the case, and you are so intrinsically motivated to be there, it actually doesn't really matter that much whether you're friends with your colleagues or, because you have another reason for being there. So I don't think this is really happening yet. I mean, some organizations, yes, but not on a broad scale where people are really embracing this, like, this is our point of difference and these are the people that should work here and why they should work here. And I really, again, coming from like a marketing background, I'm really excited to see that develop over the next few years. And I think it will become increasingly important, but part of strategic remote and hybrid adoption rather than reactive.
Lovely. Let's go. This question would be asked from one of our students, I think. And what are the skills? Again, a junior person starting their career. What skills do I need to have to thrive as a remote worker?
Okay, I won't say any more about communications because we've talked about that a lot already, and cultural and interpersonal awareness. I think something that people really need to embrace is the idea of lifelong learning. So, I mean, the days of doing one qualification and then going to an employer and working there for the next 40 years until you retire are long gone. Not only are people changing career paths and changing industries, I think the latest number I heard was that the average career transitions are about 7 now or something. I think the first time I heard it, it was like the average number of 3, and I think now it's 6 or 7. But don't don't quote me on that because I don't remember the number. So that's one thing, but also the rate of technological change is if anything, it's going to accelerate. It's not going to slow down. So whatever you're learning now, who knows if it will be obsolete in 12 months or 24 months. And you have to be willing to accept that your learning is never going to end. So, of course, you can still celebrate when you finish whatever course or degree you're doing now, but that's not the finish line. In marketing, for example, I think when I studied marketing the first time, there were no digital marketing tools. And then I believe there is a diagram on this that you can Google and find by some analytics company. In the space of about 8 years, I think the number of digital marketing, like SaaS products and other tools, went from 30 to about 8,500. So, I mean, obviously you can't learn all of them, but that just says how much things are changing. So that's one of my pet peeves is when you see a job ad and it's like, must have experience in using this software. It's like, why? It would be better to say, must be able to learn to use any new piece of software within 4 weeks. That would be a much better thing, because who's to say? Anyway, I have strong opinions about that. But
Me too. Job descriptions fascinate me on how mostly bad they are written. And one of my favorite things in IT is that they're asking, for example, for 5 years of experience of, I don't know, REST API, for example, and the REST API was invented like 2 years ago. That's what gets me every time, honestly.
Yeah, and that also comes from recruiting recruiters who aren't domain experts, which is fair enough, but they should have some better communications with the hiring manager in that case. Or maybe it indicates that the hiring manager doesn't actually know the qualifications that they need, so it's a good sign to stay away.
Yes, it's scary. It's scary to get into that. 100%. So I have so many more questions about culture and remote work, but I would also love to hear your thoughts about the future of work. So if you would like to start by defining at least what the future of work is for you, and how did you get into this field? What interested you?
I mean, I think I touched briefly on what interested me earlier, this idea of understanding how different people's workdays were and how different people fit into different positions, and that everybody needs kind of a unique situation to be able to thrive, both professionally and personally. And then from marketing, again, we've been personalizing things towards consumers for quite a while already. A/B targeting, A/B testing, targeted advertising. So I think this has kind of conditioned us, right? We're all consumers, we're all people before we're employees. And this level of personalization and kind of service has set a certain bar, and that personalization level is starting to creep into other areas as well. So that's where I started to become interested in future of work. Like, just imagine if everybody was empowered by a completely personalized workspace to become their best, achieve their career goals, be happy in their lives. What a lovely ideal situation that would be. And then of course, you go, okay, well, what's the reality? Where are we now? What are the things that we need to get there if we ever can? And so the future of work to me is about that to some degree. It's like how technology is enabling us to rethink things that we've always taken for granted. I mean, if you look at the entire history of humanity, assuming that you believe in evolution, it's been like a story of people moving closer and closer together and becoming more and more homogenous to a certain degree. Like, we went from hunter-gatherers, and then we moved into villages for protection, and then we moved into medieval cities with a wall around them, and then bigger cities with industrialization, and cities kept getting bigger and bigger because largely it was driven by people looking for work, and you go to where the big companies are, to where the jobs are. But now with the internet and remote working and all the technology that we have now, is the first time ever that it's actually enabling us to redistribute our population. Like, technology has always driven population concentration up until 20 years ago, maybe. And then now this means so many things for sustainability, for economic well-being, because you get this more like everyone who has a lot and those who have nothing when you live in a big city, because not everybody, of course, space is at a premium, so then rents are going up, cost of food is going up because cities take up a large space and they usually don't have so there's a concept called a food bowl, which is the amount of land around a city needed to sustain the population. When that doesn't become possible, then the costs go up because you have to bring food in from elsewhere. People's connection to nature, their connection to their communities, all these things are affected by us moving into bigger and bigger cities. And I think it's amazing that work, which many people see as a must, is the key to undoing all those things in our society that maybe aren't that good for us or the world around us. So, I mean, it's not a problem that I think I will see solved in my lifetime, or that I will be able to have a bit, but it just fascinates me that work is the key to almost everything from sustainability to food to community engagement and having healthy relationships with your families and just every single possible aspect of life, as well as obviously environmental sustainability. So how could we not care? How could our leaders not care about making conscious decisions about the future of work when that has a flow-through effect to so many other things, and probably has more power to change those than waiting for governments to debate them back and forth and never make a decision?
I've never thought of it that way, that the future of work will has the potential to resolve other issues like sustainability, like climate change, and people, cities exploding, all the rent,
Yeah.
yeah,
Even mental health. I mean, I don't know how
yeah,
it is
100%.
in Greece, but in Sweden and in Australia, you have these very small towns that were around farming or around mining or around some very typical, like, masculine heavy labor, right? And what's happened more recently is that the kids that grow up there, the young women go to the city because they feel like they have a better future there. And it leaves these populations of either very old people with no younger people in the community. I've seen these towns in Spain as well. You go there and there's like nobody under the age of 60 or 70, unless they're tourists. Or you leave populations that are almost entirely male because they're remaining to do the heavy labor, and they're depressed because they're alone and they drink and they do drugs. I mean, like, there are so I mean, I think remote work has the potential, and now I'm talking about remote work specifically, but it could be hybrid, or it could even be the idea of satellite hubs. So, for example, rather than one large organization having an office with 5,000 people in Athens or Stockholm or Copenhagen, that they have 10 offices with 500 people scattered across the whole country or across different countries. And that in itself, it's still an office, but it would enable people from a much bigger geographic area rather than everybody having to move to a few big cities. Has the potential to stop these small towns like dying cultural deaths. So I really do see it as the key to almost every other aspect of our society, unless we get to the point where there's some sort of governmental living wage that everybody gets regardless and people don't have to work. But that's an even less likely scenario anytime in the near future. So
I'm not sure about that. I'm not entirely sure about that. I could agree and disagree at the same time.
yeah,
During COVID
it could be enabled
yeah,
by AI and automation, but it's a challenging topic.
it has to be. Otherwise, yeah, people, mental health will be like right now. Our current mental health status will be nothing considered to when people cannot find employment, because you kind of mentioned this before, that work is not just about money. It's not about needing to get a job. It's about also fulfillment, joy, communication, relationships, tens of other things. Yeah. So, sorry, I forgot my question. Yeah. So let's say our students now. Let's go one of our student questions potentially. They go into a company that has hybrid working environment, but they want to move entirely remote, or have fully online, fully offline work, and they want to transition to a remote position, especially since most of our people here are developers, and pretty much you can do this work exclusively remotely. So what would the pitch look like if you were wearing their shoes? How could they influence the company culture?
That is hard to answer because, again, I think, of course, this is not actually, you probably have a better chance in the tech industry than in many others, but in a lot of industries, for a lot of employers, they haven't even decided yet what their official long-term stance is going to be. But in this case, it really comes down to the relationship with the manager, I would say, and what the manager's view is. And that may not be something that you can control, unfortunately. If your direct manager or their direct manager is still managing in a more outdated manner, then you may not have that many options. But other than that, if you can demonstrate that you perform your work well, regardless of where it's done, I think another thing to do is to make sure it's clear what you're delivering. Like if you can't clearly communicate your daily performance based on output rather than hours, then it becomes hard. But usually in tech, sorry, I shouldn't say usually because I'm not from a tech background, so I haven't worked in that personally. But from what I understand, I mean, you have these very particular ways of working. A lot of companies still use Agile. I don't know your views on whether that's going out of fashion or not, but either way, it's still very common, right? And there you have clear communication on a regular basis about outputs. And I think a lot of that micromanaging and needing to see people sitting in their seats occurs when the output isn't clear enough. So you think that people are working hard if they're sitting there for many hours. And if your employment contract and the understanding between the leadership and the employees is based around the number of hours you work rather than based on what you deliver, then it's always going to be challenging to make that argument. And other than that, it kind of comes down to who you have as a manager, I would say. So some aspects in your control, maybe some aspects out of your control, but you can start, at least if you are being measured based on hours worked, start thinking about the deliverables that you output and the sort of time frames around which you can report them, and start communicating in that manner with other people on your team and other people in your organization so that they understand what your value is and that it's not based on the number of hours you sit at your desk.
I'm very curious. I've been thinking about it, talking about for many years, the outcomes versus time-based performance management. And you mentioned at the beginning of your answer that the employee should make sure that he or she they communicate the outcomes they develop. But is this really their job, or is it the company's task to have a way, to have processes, systems in place in order to be measuring the outcomes without the employee needing to do this job?
It should be the company's job, but in the context of, can an employee who's trying to convince somebody that they should be able to work remotely, then maybe you do need to make that extra effort, or find a company that has a clear stance on remote and hybrid work. So ordinarily, yes, in an ideal world, it should absolutely be the organization's responsibility. But in the real world, not all organizations are there yet. And not all leaders are there yet. And I think that will start to shift as well. That's partly a generational, not that there aren't older leaders who get it, and of course some younger ones who don't get it, but to a broad scope, it's a generational issue. So it will naturally start to change a little bit as well. I also think this will start to change. It's a difficult question when it comes to AI and the idea of human skills, because how do you measure whether somebody is a creative thinker, or how do you measure whether somebody is a relationship builder? So there will need to be a degree of trust, but at the same time, workflows are becoming very much more fragmented and broken down into individual tasks. And to some degree, communicating the outcome or showing the outcome of an individual task is easier than a long and convoluted workflow.
Awesome. How do you think AI and automation, maybe we've touched a bit on it, but I would like to make it explicit. Like, how do you think AI and automation will reshape traditional job roles over the next decade? or at least ponder to answer this question. I don't know. It's quite complicated, I think.
So, I mean, there are some interesting academic papers that have come out in the last year. Of course, you can't go too far back with anything about AI because it's become outdated so quickly. And it really shows that the impact is very different depending on the job. And some may impact in ways that are completely unexpected. But I think a lot of people have this view of replacement because there's been so much talk about ChatGPT and other large language models recently. But, you know, AI is not, that's not all that AI is. There are so many other aspects to it that people, you know, some that we've even taken for granted. I mean, if you went back 40 years in time and you said, imagine that your car can sense the other traffic around it and automatically control how fast you're driving so that you won't accidentally have an accident. You would have called that artificial intelligence 30 or 40 years ago. But today we don't even think about it because it's so normal. And I've been out to one company that was talking about their automation processes. And they were saying that, oh, well, but we're not ready for AI yet. We're doing machine automation, but AI is something that we'll think about later. But when we looked at their production line, they already had AI solutions. They just didn't think of them as AI solutions. So they had product inspection, like computer vision, that would inspect the products for defects and automatically discard them. And they didn't think that that was AI. So they thought that they weren't ready for it, but they had already successfully implemented it. So I think there will be a lot of roles that transform, but also more specialization in specific skills. And some of those specific skills will rely on working together with AI tools, and other ones will just fill in the gaps where certain tasks have been automated and they just become real specialists in the tasks that have not been automated. But it varies so much from industry to industry. I mean, there's a lot of AI progress being made in the healthcare industry, but that doesn't mean that doctors are going to be out of jobs. It just means that they may finally be able to keep up with the amount of work that they have because processes are being improved, but a person still at this stage and for the foreseeable future needs to be the one making the final call on how the patients will be treated. But the AI can provide suggestions to help them in their triage processes. In others, for example, I know, like, just to come back to large language models, because that is one of the areas that have gotten the most attention and where people are the most scared, that customer service, for example, they're using chatbots to answer the most common questions. And then that means that the agents are actually able to spend their time on the difficult cases and on building more long-term and loyal customer relationships if the company chooses to take that path. Of course, some companies may choose to take the automation path, but and reduce the number of staff. But a lot of organizations, at least in Sweden, that are focused on innovation and growth, I don't think they're going to fire a lot of people. What they are going to do is enable the people that they have to do more. And I think that's the same with a lot of technology. I mean, the computer enabled people to do more. The typewriting enabled people to do more than writing by hand. Whether that's a good thing that we keep doing more and more and more, I'm not sure in terms of mental load, but so I think there'll be much more fragmentation of workflows, specialization into the human-focused tasks, and that could also tie in a little bit with what employment looks like. That because I see kind of a parallel between the development of the gig economy and the fragmentation of tasks. So I personally think that we will see more portfolio careerists who hold maybe 2 or 3 part-time jobs in specialized areas, So that's not necessarily the same as the gig economy, because they may be full-term, like long-term employees,
Yes.
but they may have a long-term part-time position with more than one employer at the same time, instead of one full-time position where they're doing a lot of different tasks, some of which may fall outside of their primary skill set. Yeah.
So many questions. I see the clock. Unfortunately, we only have like 5 minutes to go, and I would really like your feedback on this. So, as the job landscape evolves, what type of skills do you believe will be the most crucial for workers to develop, and how should schools like ours adapt to better prepare the students in those skills?
Again, I know that you specialize on programming, and I'm not from a tech background, so I can't, talk to a great degree about how to adapt those kinds of skills. But adaptability to both changing technologies, but also changing organizational structures, because as people adopt different kinds of AI and automation technologies, the way that the organization is structured down to the departments and the teams is probably going to undergo. So even if you stay with one employer for 5 years, the internal structure may change a few times during that. So you need to be able to adapt to that change and to suddenly working with different people. Embracing lifelong learning, as I said before, being able to communicate asynchronously and with different cultures. Being able to work in what's called the centaur model. So the centaur model is where the head is the person, right? And then the body is the AI. That's the horse doing all the work. So you're directing, you're thinking about where it's going, but you use it to superpower yourself, to make you go faster and do more within the same amount of time. But that requires, it doesn't just give you the answers. How do you adjust your own working style to work seamlessly and productively with these sorts of tools? The ability to communicate not just with people from different cultures and in different time zones and manage those kinds of working challenges, but also to be able to draw lines between different kinds of specializations as work becomes more fragmented and people become more focused on certain areas. Then you need to be able to build these bridges between people who, even if they may be in the same sort of career as you, they may not have the same focus or knowledge or expertise, whether that be, two people working with different kinds of programming languages that come together, or a programmer and a salesperson, or I don't know, whatever the combination might be. So I think everybody to some degree needs to be willing to become a business partner to another faculty. Yeah.
Very interesting quote. I've taken so much from this call today. There are some questions from our viewers and from myself that we don't have the time to answer at this point. But is there something that you would like to mention before we wrap up today's call? Something that really is important for you to share with our viewers?
I think that be uncomfortable with uncertainty, because things are changing rapidly. Nobody really knows where it's going. And especially as a student and as somebody who embraces learning and is venturing into new ways of doing things, be comfortable with uncertainty and be responsible for your own journey. Nobody can expect to go to an employer and then that employer will look after them for the next 40 years. It's just not the world anymore. So, be aware, keep records of what you do, more than you think that you need, because you never know in the future where you're going to need to draw a red thread between past experiences that might not be connected. And if you've forgotten what you've done 15 years ago, it will be very difficult to be able to look backwards and draw that red thread and explain what makes you you and what you can offer above other people, and have these human qualities rather than machine qualities that will give your work an edge. And that edge will come, I think, from the different paths that we take. So yeah, my best advice would be, I certainly wish I'd kept more records of things that I'd done in the past, but we can only learn going forward. So
yeah. And nobody's perfect, right? We all try to do our best, and you learn something new every day, like I did today. Thank you so very much for your
no worries.
time
Thank you for having me.
and your active listening and your participation and interest in what we do. Also, our viewers are saying excellent presentation, conversation, and brainstorming session. Thank you so much, both Emily and Damian.
Thank you for listening.
Emily, if anyone wants to connect with you, what's the best way to find you?
LinkedIn. So it's Emily and then May, MEI Carter, because otherwise Emily Carter, there are about 5,000 of them on LinkedIn. So you would, so I had to have my middle name in there. But also I'm connected to you now, so they can find me via you if they have you on LinkedIn.
And that's how I found you, actually. I said for Emily Carter, it was the same case. I found you through our mutual connection, Dimitar. Great. Thank you. Have a lovely day ahead. Thank you for joining us today, Emily. Have a great one.
Bye.
Bye.